Okay, good morning. This meeting of the California High-Speed Rail Authority will come to order. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Good morning. Director Schenk? Vice Chair Richards?
Here.
Director Rossi?
Here.
Director Curtin?
Here.
Director Lowenthal?
Here.
Director Camacho?
Here.
Director Miller?
Here.
Senator Bell? Assemblymember Arambula? Chair Richard?
Here. Vice Chair Richards, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? We're waiting for the flag. There we go.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And actually, before we start this morning and turn to our agenda and public comments, I'd just like to note that today is June 19th. This is a day that's actually celebrated by African American citizens as a demarcation of the end of the period of slavery in the United States. The governor issued a proclamation recognizing it, and I think we would like to wish everybody a happy holiday on that. And I'll just take a moment as a point of personal privilege and say that, of course, one of the greatest deprivations of the period of slavery was the division of families. And obviously, that's something I think we should keep in mind today. With that, we'll move to public comment. And I have one public comment item from Roger Blackwell of Sacramento. Sir, please go to the podium.
Thank you for having me. I have produced it's there on your desk, I believe. It shows a ruling grade from Bakersfield to LA, to the LA Mission Terminal. Now, if you're going to build up over this mountain, it's going to require a lot of time, effort, money, and you're going to have environmental impact study. If you look, that's 138 miles from, this is the milepost from Southern Pacific to LA Mission Station. Now, I propose a tunnel. If you're going to build a 16-mile tunnel anyway, from Palmdale there to Songus, why not build a 35-mile tunnel from Grapevine to Castac? You only have to get 2 environmental impact studies for that, because you're going in a tunnel, you're underground. Now, build the railroad big enough to carry a stack train. Now, if you know what a stack train is, it's where they're carrying containers. You will generate, by the time the high-speed rail is done, you will generate more money to pay for the tunnel in itself. Now, if anybody's bought a washer and dryer combination, and they bought a gas dryer, in 10 years, it will pay for itself. Both units are free. And I'm saying, this is the way the freight railroads can only come across Tehachapi. Tehachapi is every 10 minutes a train is running through there. Now, the freight railroads would go slobbering at the mouth to run through there and you'd pull it through with a mule. I have other maps here, a 3A map on that you can look at there. And it shows, I didn't know you were going to go back through Bakersfield. I thought you were going to drop straight down from Schaffner over to Grapevine and through the mountain. Now, you're going to have to cross a fault at Palmdale. Anyway, the San Andreas Fault, you're going to have to cross it there anyway. There's a tunnel in there that if you look through the archives of pictures, they had an earthquake, the tunnel wall lifted up, the railroad shot underneath the tunnel, and it came back down. So it looks like the tracks going through the tunnel, into the tunnel walls. So at Gorman, that's where you could have another station and a crossover underground. If the little country called Switzerland can build the Goddard-based tunnel 35 miles through hard rock to Italy, why can't the United States? You look at the Tunnel. They built that underneath the English Channel.
Yes, sir. Mr. Blackwell, thank you for this information. Appreciate it, and we're going to ask our engineers to take a look at it. So,
You're going to take a look at it?
yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming today. I do not have any other speaker requests. So with that, the public comment period is closed, and we'll move on to the items on our regular agenda. Item 1 is the election of board members. So why don't we start with the vice president? And do I have a nomination? What, do you want biographies at this point? Is that what you're saying? A candidate statement.
30 minutes each.
Yeah, that's it. And then we'll run this as a top 2. Is that how we do this? Yeah. Ms. Lowenthal.
Was there a nomination yet?
No, we're recognizing you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Are we able legally to do both at the same time? Well, I would like to nominate both of you to continue in your positions. I don't know if you're gluttons for punishment or
We know that's.
the fact that we see the light at the end of the tunnel, to use a bad pun. You know, both of you have demonstrated the willingness, the excitement about the future of high-speed rail, gone through the ups and downs and changes of staff. And if you are both willing to continue in these positions, I think that we would be well-served. So I am nominating both of you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Bonnie. So it was nominated, I'm interpreting that for the vice president position, Tom Richards, and for the president, or the board chair, yes. Okay, it's been moved by Director Lowenthal, seconded by Director Rossi. Are there other nominations? Okay, will the secretary please call the roll?
Vice Chair Richards?
Yes.
Director Rossi? No. Director Curtin?
Yes.
Director Lowenthal? Yes. Director Camacho?
Yes.
Director Miller? Yes. Chair Richard?
Yes. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, colleagues. I appreciate that. Yeah. So moving, Tom, did you want to give an acceptance speech? Was that?
No, I said thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, that's good. All right, let's move to item 2. Thank you, colleagues. Do I have a motion for the approval of the board minutes from May 15th? Okay, it's been moved. Was that Director Miller or Director Lowenthal? And seconded by Director Rossi. Secretary, please call the roll.
Vice Chair Richards?
Yes.
Director Rossi?
Yes.
Director Curtin?
Yes.
Director Lowenthal? Yes. Director Camacho? Yes. Director Miller? Yes. Chair Richard?
Yes, thank you. Okay, the next item is item 3. It's a status report on construction package 1, project and construction management services, or PCM services. Mr. Hedges.
Good morning. I'm Joe Hedges. I'm the Chief Operating Officer. I'm here with Terry. Terry and I are going to brief basically on the construction project management piece. This was a comeback about approximately 3 months ago. We asked for an increase for CP1. You granted that funding increase with the stipulation that we come back and give you an update of some of the changes that we have made. Terry's been leading those changes, so with that, I'll just turn the podium over to Terry. Terry?
Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Hedges. Good morning, Chairman and members of the board. I'm going to give just a brief update on the PCMs, not just CP1, but on all three of our PCMs. As you know, we have 3 existing contracts. We have the first one on CP1. It was Wong Harris, who has a contract value of $39.7 and a contract term of December 31st, 2019. And this board approved the extension of that in the March of this year. CP23 PCM is Arcadis US, and they have a contract value of $66.8 million and a contract term of April 30th, 2019. And H&TB is the PCM for CP4. They have a contract value of $30 million and a contract term that ends November 25th, 2020. I want to point out that the baseline includes additional budget for future consideration based upon PCM performance and overall program objectives. I want to talk a little bit about some lessons learned, what we've been doing or what we've been looking at since August of last year. We've conducted an extensive review of the PCM's contract, all 3 PCM's contract, as well as the PCM manual. We've been working on aligning that manual with our current contract requirements. And some of the things that we've identified as we've gone through this extensive review is clearly defining roles and responsibilities for the PCM, aligning our PCM with our authority legal, right-of-way, utility and third parties, environmental, engineering, and rail operations. We've looked at clearly defining the role of the authority's design and construction manager and identifying that role as the individual with the PCM financial responsibility and also the responsibility for performing a PCM evaluation. We've been updating the PCM manual as well as the attachments and references.
Put your mic on. Director Rossi.
When you talk about responsible for PCM performance evaluation, who does the evaluation?
This is the authority design and construction manager that does that, and I'll get down to explaining that in just a couple minutes, or just the next slide. And so at the bottom of this page, Director Rossi, it talks about the establishing of the performance evaluation template and dashboard. Up until just recently, we didn't have a performance evaluation or a dashboard, and so part of this evaluation and this extensive review, we've established a review and an evaluation template. And so the next slide, on the bottom of that next slide, you see a summary of the performance evaluations that we are conducting right now. And what that evaluation sheet is doing is it's taking the 9 evaluation criteria that are in the PCM's contract. And those are the project management and administration, construction oversight, quality oversight, environmental oversight, safety and security, third party and utility oversight, project controls oversight, risk management, right-of-way coordination, and environmental oversight. Each one of these are broken down into a series of questions or a series of evaluations that we look at as a PCM, and we evaluate those. And then over on the right-hand side, we have 5 levels of performance evaluation. We have excellent, above requirements, meets requirements, below requirements, and poor. Each one of those that are above or below meets requirements, a comment or a evaluation for each one of those has to be given of why do they have an above requirement or an excellent, or why they have below requirement or poor, and that's included in the evaluation. The next slide shows a dashboard Go ahead, Director Rusty.
Can you just tell me how you read this slide?
The slide is just.
Are you adding up? I guess you're adding, no, that's 35, it's 45, so you're adding up? Is that the way that works? So where it says total score, all of these things below come to that total score?
Correct.
And then how do you read across from the perspective of hitting your percentages?
Director Rossi, if we could go to the next slide, I think that may explain a little bit better.
Actually, it won't.
It won't?
Well, because I can't read it.
Correct.
So the next slide won't help me in that regard.
This is just to provide you a kind of an overview or kind of a pictorial view of what these look like. That we have evaluations and evaluation templates.
Fair enough. And look, I understand I'm actually trying to understand how these numbers work.
And I would be happy to sit down and explain those to you.
Okay, fair enough. We can do it offline.
The next slide is the performance evaluation dashboard, and what it has there is a total score, and then each of the 9 evaluation areas are also scored, and all those scores collapsed up into the total score. Also on this slide, there is provides a plan versus actual expenditure summary, and that is on the top right-hand side of your of the slide.
So that's the general score plus the 9.
The 9 criteria collapse up to make the final
general
final score.
Okay. Probably it'd help if we'd just seen this a little bit earlier, and then we wouldn't be asking
Understood.
questions like this.
Understood.
And it's reasonably hard to read this slide.
The final slide here is some of the changes that we are looking at and moving forward. At the March board meeting, we were asked, what are we going to be doing differently? So some of the changes that are underway are re-energizing and focusing our contract management team. That's the authority folks, the authority staff. We're looking at right-sizing the PCMs and being consistent across all 3 PCMs as far as their staff is concerned. We're looking at retraining the authority and PCM staff to better use the design-build model. We've had executive involvement from each of the PCMs. We've had project leadership changes in both CP1 and CP23. We've evaluated the ICE and the ISE, and we have discontinued the ISE out of contract.
Could you define those, Mr. Ogle?
Excuse me?
Yeah, could you just define that for the public here, what ICE and ISE is?
The ISE is the independent check engineer, and that is a task that was assigned in CP1 to the design builder.
Right.
In CP23 and CP4 was assigned to the PCM.
Right.
And so, and then during our evaluation, we believe that is better served under the design builder and not under the PCM. And so we are moving forward with discontinuing ISE, and in future contracts, we will not have ICE or ISE in the PCM contract, but that will be in the design build contract.
Mr. Chairman,
Director Camacho.
then the evaluation that you're talking about won't be, as an example, CP23 has a design review process which is probably greater than CP1. So will their contract terminate first before you start this new evaluation process? Because they do in fact have ICE and ISE, but they also have the RDP and another entity looking at their design review. So are we going to terminate those contracts first, or are we pulling that out now?
We're pulling that out now.
Yeah, well, I had asked that question earlier, and I thought that the answer was that it was too late and they were going to extend the contract and then make that change.
Are you talking about ICE or ISE, sir?
Well, you had ICE, ISE.
ICE, we're going to run to completion. since
Okay.
we're at the final stages of all of our designs right now. Pulling it back out right now, in my evaluation, will just create confusion and add costs to the program. All right, so we're going to finish off the ICE process as in these latter stages. Future modification will probably eliminate it and make that a contractor responsibility, design builder responsibility. ISC, since with regards to 3-4, we have not yet begun, and 2-3, we have not yet begun substantial construction. We will downsize that, right-size that in the design builds contract, in the PCM contract, and move it over into design builder.
On the CP23, you also had the CPM stamping drawings. Are you going to continue with that?
Yeah, we're going to keep that in the right proportion. One of the things that you just saw right now is a definition of rules with regards to the authority's position and responsibility with regards to engineering, the RDP and the state, the PCM, and the design builder. Want to make sure that the design builder maintains the role and responsibility of being the designer of record. That is our key focus right now.
But in fact, under a design build, they have a architect stamping those drawings there. They are, in fact, the ones responsible. So to have a redundant stamp on the drawings by a PCM makes no sense to me.
Right now, that redundant stamp is part of the ICE process. I would agree with you if we were to start from ground zero, that we would probably eliminate that as we make this part of the design builder's responsibility.
Okay, one last question. So if in fact they have that responsibility, CP1 and CP4, neither one of them have that responsibility. So when you evaluate them, how do they get evaluated if in fact they have one more review of 100% drawings?
CP4 does have that responsibility. CP1 does not. CP1 is the exemption. ICE and ISC was retained by the design builder. How it's a graded approach, sir. That what we're with regards to the evaluation, it is impacted in the one design overview. That is one of the considerations as they look at the evaluation. It is a little bit hard and difficult to come to an apples-to-apples evaluation with these different scopes. That's why one of the things that future actions that Terry indicated is the right sizing, redoing the manual, redoing our process, so in future contracts, it is much more clear.
So they will go through this process of evaluation and they will be mandated as continuous stamp drawings.
With regards to finishing off the designs of CP4 and 2-3 that are in the latter stages of issuing the designer of record drawings, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Ogle?
Just the last couple of items is, another thing that's change underway is providing continuity by linking the PCM with the regional project controls. And some upcoming changes is we're updating the entire PCM manual as well as the attachments for program consistency. And we will provide a quarterly performance report. The next one is due in September of 2018.
Do you mean provide that to the board or provide it, when you say provide a quarterly performance report?
We will provide it to the
FNA
to the PCMs and to our executive management.
Okay. Questions for Mr. Ogle or Mr. Hedges? Director Curtin.
I'm very happy to see these changes, but I have a question about the integration points of the projects. These are the PCMs on each individual project, and I know there's been concerns, at least I've had concerns in the past about where the projects actually meet. How does who does the oversight for the integration points if there's disagreements or differences?
So there's clauses in all three contracts as far as integration is concerned at the points. One of the things that the PCMs do or kind of spearhead is a coordination meeting between all of the two design builders if it's an integration point at that location, so that we're not meeting at different elevations or different locations.
Okay, so is that new, or is that something that's historically been happening? Because I've heard these problems have existed. I'm just wondering if this reform, or whatever you want to call it, is including that kind of decision-making process?
I was involved in the CP1 and CP2-3 integration meeting, and we had multiple meetings on that where we sat down both design builders to talk about the alignments, horizontal, vertical profiles, cross sections, the whole thing is integrated.
That was after it was discovered that there was a problem. I'm asking, is there going to be a sort of an ongoing process, and who's responsible to pull those meetings together?
It's the PCM as well as the design builders to coordinate that, and the authority will help assist that as well.
Okay, that doesn't quite get to it, but I'm just, if somebody doesn't take an affirmative action to say, or is it a regularly scheduled meeting that is designed to find out if there are issues at these integration points?
When we were talking about CP2-3 and CP1, yes, there were regular meetings for probably about 3
But that was
3
after
months.
there was an issue arising about, there were some problems.
Correct.
So
correct.
what happens before there's an issue that arises? Is there a way to find out about issues before they arise?
That would be, your point's very, very well taken, and that would be something that the design builders for CP2-3 and CP4, as well as the PCMs and our authority staff to coordinate and to get those started.
Okay, I'm just asking who's responsible to get them started?
The PCM is responsible.
Each side says, okay, we're going to meet on June 15th, or the problem is there's two entities and they're both responsible for the same sort of thing. I'm just asking if the oversight, whoever oversees the 3 programs, has a regularly set up requirement to make sure that these meetings happen.
The PCMs would be responsible, and since I'm responsible for the entire Central Valley, that would be my responsibility to undertake that.
Okay, so when, let's assume for a minute we're going to another outside the Central Valley, do you wait for them to call you and say, hey, what happens here when we meet?
I understand what you're saying, and we can put stronger language into the contract as we move away from the Central Valley.
All I'm saying is that we have different entities doing different portions of it, and they view the world from their own perspective. We need somebody who says they have to sit down and organize they have to organize answers to problems, but we have to also identify when those problems are happening, as opposed to after we find out there's a problem.
Sir, the authority is currently taking a very aggressive role in doing that. We are working basically with each of the CP contractors. I personally have led an integrated team down with regards to the head of each of the groups of headquarters, as in to ensure we identify where those problems are and to get help into the field. One of the shout out I'd like to give is to PG&E. We just had a day summit with PG&E, and we sat down and worked through some of those coordination issues at the authority level. We brought the contractors in to hear them as in start resolving some of their issues. I think we're making some bold steps forward, which is a great benefit to the authority, since we're paying basically as built cost for that with regards to the concept of our reimbursement back to the contractors through the provisional sums.
So I'm quite sure PG&E is really happy about that shout out, because they need those things right about now. But that could be a similar problem on 2 different projects, right?
It is, sir. We had the whole valley in. There's a lot of commonality of issues, right? And the other issues is with regards, goes back to this brief, and that is the problems that we're currently having with ICE finalizing some of these designs. Engineering is taking a much more aggressive role. They've come in right now in the latter stages of this and are basically arbitrating through some of these design comments at a headquarters level as to push the designs through.
Good. So what you're saying, though, is you sort of have a transition team or integration point team.
Yeah, what we're doing, sir, is actually we're just doing our jobs. Redefining the roles and responsibilities of headquarters, redefining the roles and responsibilities of a local field execution. One of the things of headquarters is this oversight and expertise, where the projects need that expertise, because we don't want to put in layers and layers of expertise, but to be able to leverage a common pool of expertise to the problems.
Good.
And that's what you're seeing right
Okay.
now. I compliment both engineering and environmental for doing that right now as we speak.
Thanks.
Okay. I have a question, but are there other questions beforehand? Director Rossi?
Well, I have one for you.
I'm sorry, a question for me?
Yes, or a point.
Okay.
And I understand this is an information item. We don't have to do any voting on it. We don't, and it's in response to a director's request. I think that's great. But it would be good if we had a rule here that if we're going to get this stuff, we don't get it the night of, the night before the meeting. Because there is, trying to understand these numbers and I'm sorry, I don't carry a computer, I carry a cell phone. And so I don't understand the numbers. And again, I know I don't have to do anything, but I would like, once you said, I would just like to understand them. So that's my point for you, Mr. Chairman, for you, Mr. Ogle. I would like you to give me a call and take me through these numbers so I can understand how you weight average the risks and all of that.
Mr. Chairman, I want to take some responsibility for that. When we pull the briefing documents together to brief the members in advance, the informational document on this case wasn't in there, mostly because it was information we're focusing on the action items. But going forward, we'll ensure they're in the briefing documents earlier, and we'll go through them on the briefings that we normally do.
Very good. I had a couple of questions, if I might, gentlemen. First of all, I just want to say thank you for this approach. I think it's good. I don't have the same level of insight that some of my colleagues do about how the interaction should take place between the PCMs and all the different elements that we have. I'd been questioning in the past, not questioning in a critical sense, but just questioning to try to understand the role of the PCM versus the rail delivery partner and so forth. So I think rationalizing all that makes sense. So two things. First of all, I want to support and share, associate myself with Director Curtin's remarks about integration, because I don't know much about this stuff, but hanging around with a bunch of engineers when I was a kid, they were always banging away about how important it was to look at the interfaces and that's where problems were. So maybe one approach also to the issues that Director Curtin raised is that in your evaluation criteria, one of the things to evaluate the PCMs on is how well they're helping to identify and resolve integration issues. So I don't know if that should be part of their scope, but I would just suggest that maybe that's an area to think about to address some of Director Curtin's concerns, which I would share. But I guess my main question on this, you've laid out an approach to an evaluation, and you've laid out an approach to basically synthesize that evaluation onto a dashboard. All of that's good, all of that's quantitative. But how do you make an evaluation of whether the PCM is excellent or above requirements or otherwise with something like project management and administration? I mean, at some point, you have to apply some criteria to that. And I guess what I'm trying to understand is, are we going to anticipate conflicts if you're making a subjective judgment in those areas and the PCM disagrees with that? So, I mean, where is that line where we go from the subjective to the objective assessment?
So there is some subjectivity in the scoring. The DCMs are encouraged and to meet with the PCMs after they do their initial evaluation for that particular time period, and to sit down and go through the evaluation with them and evaluate whether the scores are accurate or not. After that is done, the scores are brought to me, and I sit down with the DCMs and we go through the scores again, reflective of what is in there. So we are accurately trying to reflect what the performance is of the PCM. But the PCMs have input, It's the DCMs that are ultimately responsible for the evaluation, and then that gets shared with me before it gets finalized.
Okay, so there's some subjectivity, but there's a process that allows for back and forth so that hopefully
sir.
people can get on the
There's
same
also
page.
too, sir, there's also criteria what defines what is each of those levels.
Okay, and
So
that's going to be
that
in your
allows you
manual? or
then with that, you have to provide the subjective of supplying incidences that allow you then to either to come to how did they meet that criteria or did they not meet that criteria.
Okay. And then my last question on this is, what happens, what is the consequence of a determination that a PCM is, say, below requirements? I mean, obviously, we get out the proverbial whip and try to get them to do better, but what are there contractual consequences? What happens?
There is, sir. Well, the first step would be is the issuance of NCRs, right? As into basically at this point to do a root cause analysis and to take a corrective action on the part of the PCM. If that corrective action was not followed through, then you would invoke the contract with regards to the termination of default clauses and start that process if the remedy was that severe. So, and also too, what's important about this evaluation is it allows us to start evaluating with regards to future contract discussions. Do we extend these contracts? Do we retain these contracts, right? And with regards to the evaluation of this contractor to future procurements, what is their value to the authority?
Well, I don't want to. I appreciate that answer, but I don't want to prolong this. But just last thought, which is, I think experience has shown, number one, that replacing a contractor, we always face kind of a nuclear option type decision where it could be, terribly disruptive to the program. So sometimes we get stuck with things that we don't want to, even if we're not satisfied, because we only have an on-off switch. So not for today, but I guess I'd be interested at some point in thinking about whether or not a series of performance incentives and penalties is maybe a better way to motivate people than simply, I'm not sure whose head we're putting the gun to, I guess, is when when we do this. So that's just one thought. Just because, as I said, experience has shown that sometimes we end up with these conversations about, well, we're not happy, but we can't do this. And then the second thing I was going to say is, I'm not sure, but I don't think we're allowed in a procurement to use past performance or disappointment in a forward procurement. So I'm not sure we can say to somebody, you did a bad job for us last time, so on the next construction contract, we're not going to, I'm looking at Mr. Felenz on that, but in general, unless you debar somebody, I think that there are rules that don't allow you to bring a past contract into a consideration of a future one.
That's true in the A&E context. That could be part of an evaluation for future procurement. So you could ask for references,
Okay.
for contacts to get information about past performance of particular architectural and engineering.
All right, if there's a way to do that, that's fine. I was just responding to the notion, I don't want to get painted into a corner where either we can't get rid of somebody because it's too disruptive to the program and we can't deny them a contract going forward. So that's the only reason I'm just suggesting today for your consideration. Maybe there's some gradation in there of performance incentives and penalties that gives us a stronger hand. I think Mr. Camacho was first. And then
Is this, what we're really talking about with these scores is almost a performance-driven contract. And what Chairman has just indicated about incentives, there are contracts that allow for that, which are, your cost plus or your fixed fee with an award fee as the incentive. Can we contemplate that, doing that for at least these types of procurements?
We could put some terms in there that would allow certain tasks to be done on a lump sum basis, negotiation, in the A&E contract. Yes, there are ways to do it.
In the military, there are a jillion models of performance-based contracts, and they're evaluated based on your performance each quarter. So it's certainly an incentive to raise your level of performance.
So I'd also probably advocate too that as we get a better definition what these contracts are, standardize them, and be able to apply them in a graded approach to the construction project, i.e. if it's a $450 million project or a $1.5 billion project, can you right-size these contracts, a graded approach to that, and maybe even use a firm fixed price in the future instead of T&M. So again, love the conversation. All this is great, to be able to do this as we press forward and look towards the future.
Mr. Rossi and then Director Miller.
Yeah, I would just caution you in this regard. We all have great ideas up here, but this is the best performance review process I've seen come out of the authority, and I'm totally supportive of it. Don't let us, in our own particular individual things, lead you down the primrose path. Okay? I mean, Ernie's, if you can make this a incentive based, that'd be great. Dan's concerns, but what you have here is more than we've ever had, and so thank you very much.
Sir, thank you, and I want to recognize Terry and his team for the ones who carried the water. They've done an outstanding job. Yeah. And then two is, we want to start looking at this, to apply this in other places within the authority. This was kind of a prototype to look to see if we can do this at other places.
Good. Director Miller.
I actually was going to echo Director Rossi, kind of beat me to it, but I wanted to thank you for this, because evaluation of your contractors is really important, particularly in an infrastructure project of this size. It gives you an idea of who's doing the best, and you can learn things from a process like this. So I really appreciate the fact that you're doing it. I also caution you to not take individual comments from us up here, because quite frankly, you're the ones, we're depending on you. And someone might have a really great idea that you could factor in, but we really look to you to make the decisions. And I think that's I speak for every board member on that. So I want to thank you. How often do you do this? Is this a continuing evaluation? Are you doing this quarterly, or what's the idea?
Yes, we're going to do it on a quarterly basis, but monthly, we're going to be looking at the PCM informally and doing this as well,
Yeah.
so that we don't wait till 3 months to come up with a quarterly report.
Well, thank you all for that, and I appreciate my colleagues' recognition of your work, so it's good. Even if they thought my idea sucked.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, we're on to item 4, which is consider accepting the program baseline, cost, schedule, and scope, and approving adjustments to existing contracts, and accepting the 2018-19 fiscal year budget necessary to implement the business plan. Good morning, Mr. Hill.
Good morning, Chair Richard, directors. I have to say, I am so pleased to be here, to be able to present the 2018 baseline. This is a monumental achievement by the joint team to do it, and it is so welcome. So it's an opportunity for all of us. It is an important milestone. Basically, it brings together all the information we have on this program and have on this program for 10 years. $4 billion of spend. It integrates the program controls, the IT platforms, and the baseline information itself to one single source of information. It is now centralized. We will be able to use it for budgets, for forecasting, and making informed decisions, which is so important for a program of this size. It will be able to track risk, identify risk, but more importantly, identify how we mitigate those risks and reduce costs and exposure to this program. It is a master plan supported by the critical and individual information of the regions, of the projects, of the consultants, of the authority, and it meets, overall, it meets our objectives. It meets the objective of the 2018 business plan. It reflects it. It is the next step from the business plan to the baseline. It meets our commitments to our federal partners. Very key is obviously delivering the grant agreements by 2022. It shows that we extend the Silicon Valley, Central Valley to San Francisco and to Bakersfield, a way forward. It invests funds in the 224 miles. It basically, to use the title, is scope, time, cost, and risk. It is not just 10, 12 slides. It is a massive amount of data collected that is there for reference for us to use and go forward. It also invests in the bookends as part of those business plan objectives that we are going to go forward with in Southern and Northern California. So a key milestone, a key tool. We are looking for you today, a number of actions, accept the baseline as a delivery plan. It updates the ROD schedules, and it gives a path forward, as I said, to delivering the 2018 business plan. We have 9 particular contracts that we need to amend in terms of time, scope, and cost, which are part of this documentation. And all those contracts have been through PDC, the Program Delivery Committee, and through the Business Oversight Committee, and received approval to come to the board. Normally, we would come to you with individual contracts. The baseline is a new beginning, but hopefully we will come to you on exceptional basis for those approvals. But at this stage, we're now able to come forward with an overall plan. It also indicates, and that we ask for your acceptance of the overall budget, and also acceptance of the 2018-19 year budget. And I'll go into those in more detail. And Russ, Chief Financial Officer, will go through those in particular at the end of the next section of this presentation. The baseline cost summary, as I mentioned 2 numbers before, 13.7, which is the program budget, which is basically the budget that allows us to undertake work until the next 2025, meets our obligations in the Central Valley, the ARA, the RODs, and also the bookends. The V2V cost indicated as part of the business plan at 29.5, with additional items, as we show here, of 31.9. This spend, this budget, is very aggressive. This numbers, and I will show you on the critical path and the schedule that comes up in a minute. This is a very aggressive program, but it is required to meet our obligations. The ROD schedules in particular, we show here. The movement, the preferred alternative dates that will come to the board. We show the existing FRA ROD dates, and then the ROD dates that are now assumed in the baseline. Again, these meet our commitments for the 22 completion date of ARA. This is positive in the sense that we have now a very clear direction forward with how and what we are doing on each individual ROD, how we're going to develop it, and a plan to go forward to develop on this timescale, increasing the probability and the delivery certainty. It equally shows that we will be delivering to you in October a preferred alternative for the Bakersfield to Palmdale, and also the LGA ROD in October, which will be a board meeting, I believe, in Bakersfield to meet that.
Roy, what does LGA stand for?
Local generated alternative.
Okay,
it's the
thank you.
Bakersfield
Got it.
proposal.
Yeah, and as long as we're doing that, I just want to make sure for the public who's following along, ROD is a record of decision, which basically is synonymous with the completion of the environmental review.
Correct.
Federal and state.
Thank you. And also the good news is that we will be bringing forward to you 3 preferred alternatives for the southern route of Palmdale to Burbank, Burbank to LA, LA to Anaheim in November. So we have a way forward. This is all within the baseline and all within our plan going forward. Critical path, key delivery dates. There's 3 things I would highlight here for you. Obviously, we complete the ARA work ongoing by 2022. There are a number of activities that we start outside and make decisions. We have to make a number of decisions in the next 6 to 18 months regarding Bakersfield, regarding track and systems and trains procurement, and all those are dependent upon funding and the direction and availability of those funds and how we best utilize them. And also, it shows that we have the phase completion operations at the bottom there for Central Valley, Bakersfield, Gilroy, and also V2V completion by 2029. So, as I said before, we have a baseline. It is very aggressive, but it is a plan that I believe we can all work to now and achieve what we set out to do. As to the contract amendments, these are the 9 that we are specifically asking you to approve today. Many of these, the details on the right-hand side, are now reconciled with the ROD baseline schedule dates, which basically indicate what I've just shown you as far as ROD and preferred alternative solutions, and therefore there are a number of extensions of time and contract sums that are increased to reflect those extended periods. There are a number of other contracts that we approve here, such as the Westerveld Ecological Services, which we need additional acreage of land for environmental mitigation, kit fox, etc., things like we use, but that is a new additional land requirement. And so I look to you to approve those as part of the baseline. They're within the numbers overall. They're part of the work activities that we need to undertake in the 18-19 financial budget period. So, all good news. You equally have to identify the risk and what we are doing about those risks that we have in front of us. I believe that none of these risks should come as a surprise to anyone in this room. There are things that we have identified, flagged up previously, identified in the business plan. Construction packages we need to address. We need to deal with legacy situations with right-of-way, with third parties, with design development, and we are, under the leadership of Joe Hedges and Brad Kelly, certainly putting the resources and the focus into resolving those outstanding issues that allow the contractors to perform, and allowing the contractor to perform allows us to mitigate delay costs, which is so detrimental. But we can do that, and it's being dealt with, and I believe we will see a substantial change in performance over the next few months. The tunnels, Pacheco Pass in particular, was identified in the business plan, and we are working with the ETO, the Early Train Operator Partner, and others to see how and best to deliver it and how we can reduce cost. Schedules, critical work, tunnels, etc. I will come to it in a minute. This is only part. The baseline is just the first start of establishing how we look at the schedules outside of the Central Valley and mitigate the plan forward, how we have funding for those activities and how we can do work when that funding becomes available. Organizational capability. This is a big program. This is a very big program, and like with all big programs around the world, the organization...
Could I ask you a question?
Sure.
When you get down to your, now talking about Silicon Valley, the Central Valley schedules, backloaded. So I'm assuming that that work, if I'm reading this right, doesn't occur until you figure out the funding slash finance.
Absolutely right.
So you stay focused on your 3 major items that you mentioned at the beginning.
We are absolutely prioritized as far as the Central Valley and the bookend work. Absolutely. Those decisions are things that we now, with the baseline, have flagged up. They become decisions within the next 6 to 12 months. And depending on funding development in that period is when we would come and make a decision as far as how we spend those funds.
Thank you very much.
As I said, organizational capability is maturing, new senior leadership, the program management plan, which will be issued in August, again, will be fundamental and is the third part of this stool, the business plan, the baseline, and the PMP. And funding, contracted consultant management. The PMP is key to that, roles and responsibilities, not just individuals, but the entities involved in this program, and making it very clear that, you know, where there is confusion, where there is overlap, where there are gaps, that they are dealt with. Funding is a key risk, identified again in the business plan, but we have sufficient funds to complete our obligations for 2022, and we have a plan to do it, and we will do that. Next steps. Having brought this to you today, we are starting with the next baseline. We anticipate a baseline being updated daily, but a baseline being revised on a yearly basis when it either comes to the project update year or to the business plan year. The information we have now allows us to change control every particular item on this program. Again, whether it's a schedule item, a timeline item, a cost item, a scope item, a risk item. So we will change control every part of this program going forward. Completion of interim services, looking at how we have interim services throughout this, the Valley, Central Valley, and the V2V. Implement change control, as I've talked about, PMP, and conduct a risk analysis over the next 6 months. We anticipate the next baseline with a very detailed risk analysis to come to the March program update meeting. And as you will see at that point, when we have done that detailed risk analysis, we will be able to advise again on the prudent level of reserve contingency that needs to be applied for this program. That concludes my part of this presentation. I hand over to Russ Fong.
Thank you, Roy. Russ Fong, your Chief Financial Officer. Last month, the board adopted a 2018 business plan. Today, what Roy and I are doing is presenting the tools that we need to make this a successful plan. An important part of the baseline is our budget. That's what I'd like to talk about today. For the first time, we have a cost-loaded schedule that's constrained by funding availability. Basically, what that means is our capital expenditures, our CapEx, are now tied to a schedule, and that schedule is aligned with a budget that's broken down from the contract level. That is something we've never had before. So with that, let's take a look at our two budgets. First of all, our capital outlay and administrative budgets. Let's start with the cap outlay. This is our budget that focuses on our construction aspects of our project. This budget includes items such as road design build contracts, environmental clearance, third-party agreements, RDP, PCMs, RCs, and other supporting construction contracts. This budget is directly tied to the baseline that Roy just presented. If you look at the bottom of column E, total program budget is $13.7 billion, or a 41% increase over last year's budget of $9.7 billion. Looking at our fiscal year 18-19, if you again looking at bottom of column E, our annual budget for fiscal year 18 and 19 is $1.8 billion, or a 9% increase over last year's budget of $1.6 billion. Last year, we spent 56% of our cap outlay budget. These budgets will fund our top 3 priorities: the ARA grant scope of work, the Central Valley segment completion, and the bookend corridor projects. I'd like to now move over to our admin budget. And our admin budget supports the department's budgets for state salaries, benefits, and standard operating expenditures, such as rent, office supplies, travel, training, and IT. Here's the administrative budget displayed by office. This chart shows who's spending the money. The admin budget for fiscal year 18 and 19 is $45 million, or a 0.1% increase from last year's budget. Here's the same admin budget displayed by line items. This chart reflects what we're spending the money on. Last year, we spent 81% of our admin budget. And then finally, this reflects our 226 state positions broken out by office. This concludes our presentation. Roy and I would be happy to answer any questions. With that being said, Roy and I would like to thank the team for all the hard work they've done on this baseline. It was truly a team effort from both the private sector and the state side, and a lot of the folks are here sitting behind us, and I just wanted to point that out. This was an excellent exercise and a true team effort.
Could I ask all the people who worked on this to stand up for a second so that the board members can see who you are? Thank you. Thank you. Good job. I'm going to start right to left with colleagues' questions. Questions for the staff, starting with Director Lowenthal.
I wanted to thank you for your incredibly hard work and the clarity of the presentation. I was really pleased on page 8 in looking at the amendments. It just seems that in the past, we've gotten these amendments one by one. You know, we need more money for, this area, more money for that area. I think it's very helpful to have all of it in one place, so we know what the future is bringing, and I think that this baseline is going to be a tremendous roadmap, master plan for the future. I also appreciate that you put in the budget for the offices. I do have a question. I know in the past we hadn't filled some of the positions, and I wonder where we stand now with hiring.
Yeah, Director Lowenthal, our current vacancy rate is 18%, and it's kind of hovered between 14 and 18% over the last probably 4 years. Having said that, part of the PMP process is to look at our organization and ensure that all the right positions are in the right areas, and that will be a part of what we look at going forward, to see how we can fill those vacancies and making sure that they're in the right spot.
Are there some areas where we're lacking, where it's difficult to find the expertise needed?
I think the organization as a whole is fairly lean, but having said that, I think what this PMP process will do is making sure that we have the right resources in the critical areas, and more importantly, the right resources in the critical areas at that point in time.
And which areas are we talking about?
Program delivery. There's also the support departments. We just got to make sure that, again, there's the right mixture of state staff and RDP staff in those areas.
Brian Kelly's saying, do you want to?
Sorry, just to answer your question on some of the things. There are some areas where I would call it high specialization in the position we want to fill. For example, risk assessment is an area that's a highly specialized area, and that's one that we have an authority to bring in a public or a state staff person to fill that role. I think we're going to expand our search and consider more options to fill that and bring in the right resources and capability in that area. So that's when you say, which ones are difficult, or that's a high specialization area that I would point to as an example.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Director Miller.
I have two basic questions. First of all, I just want to thank you. I have no problem with approving the extensions. I just want to clarify a couple things. On page 6, I know that we're moving out baseline dates, and I understand that. That's potentially, those things always get moved out. But I really am looking at the notes down below, and not note number 1, but note number 2, which is talking about NEPA assignments. And is that true for all of these projects that are not yet completed, or just certain segments?
Yes, it's true for all. It allows us to have control over the process, so the risk of extending dates and the ability to bring forward and prioritize reviews, do concurrent reviews, etc.,
right.
Is all part of the NEPA process, which is, positive, and work with our colleagues at FRA to do this.
Right, and so that's something that I would just think you're working hard on, right? Because
yes, of course.
That does expedite.
Obviously, getting the NEPA assignment is the
yes,
key.
Yes, comment on that.
is the key starting point.
He's hitting me under the table. Go ahead, Brian.
But yes, once we get it, it's certainly a high priority to focus on.
Right.
I think Roy said it well in terms of why is the NEPA assignment so important, because it does allow us to control with some better effect the timeline for reviews on elements of analysis that are in the environmental process. We have gone through a public process at the federal level seeking NEPA assignment to this authority. That question is still pending, but they just completed their public comment period. We had overwhelming public support for it, and we continue to work closely with the FRA and the Secretary's office at the federal level to get assignment awarded to California. I would just, as a separate note, this NEPA assignment is something that has been in effect in 6 states on the highway side. The result is generally months of review, streamlined process, and hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in savings in that process. And so we have, I think we're the only state with the application back there for the railroad side. It would be precedent setting, but it's an important step forward, and we think in line with both the administration here and the federal administration's announced want to increase environmental streamlining in infrastructure. And so we think this is a good place for us to come together and move forward.
Yeah, no, I think it's a kind of a brilliant move. I just wanted to applaud you on that because that's where I thought you were going. I think it's a great thing. I do have a question on page 8 on the Westervelt and California Department of Conservation contracts. I mean, I know we've got mitigation, and I know you've got a lot of acreage and easements and that sort of thing, but just talk to me a little bit about, or we could do this offline too, maybe, just the,
I checked with...
there's no overlapping between these two,
No.
right?
No, it's not. It's, I checked before I came to the meeting. It's specific requirements. They are separate, and they are absolutely necessary for us to go forward with, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions before I have some? Vice Chair Richards, any question? Questions or comments, I should say.
Roy, you mentioned on a couple of occasions it being a very aggressive baseline. So what's your sense, what does that mean in terms of our ability to successfully deliver the baseline as identified here with that level of being very aggressive? What needs to occur, and what control do we have over those things that may be necessary in order to achieve this?
I believe we have the control over nearly all of it. It is within our ability, should we do the right things. This is obviously a substantial point in time to be able to have a plan, work to a plan, manage a plan, and manage changes. And that will be a discipline that everybody in this room will need to understand. It is not possible to deliver a program of this size and nature and say yes to people all the time. It has to be a discipline to say, no, this is our plan, and if you need to do something else, we have to consider it. It will have implications, and the good thing with the baseline is that now we can have immediate, almost immediate, here's the implication of making a decision. I think the PMP, which Joe and Brian talked about, will be the next absolute key essential to this organization's maturity. If we do not get that in place in the right tense, which I'm sure and confident we will, that will be detrimental. But it will also be very positive to have it there, and we need to be running efficiently and effectively as an organization. If I put it in terms of money, in 11 days' time, we need to be spending double what we're spending. And we need to be managing that effectively. And I mean spending on the right things. And that is an absolute key going forward. So for the next year, as Russ has just presented, we need to be spending $1.8 billion of the right money in the right activities. So that is within our control. We are dealing with things like design issues with right-of-way. We've really improved the right-of-way and third-party issues. We've resolved parts of PG&E, as was talked about earlier. So I am confident that we can deliver this, but I recognize, it is a challenge, and it is aggressive, but we need to make the right decisions quickly and do it, and deliver it. And I think, this next 6 months will be absolutely key to that.
Thank you, and I'll join my colleagues. In the 8 or 7 years that we've been sitting up here, I do not recall any report or plan put before this board by the management and staff to the degree of complexity that is involved here to have what appears to be the amount of data that have been able to place into this plan, along with a level of confidence that we can achieve what needs to be done here. And that speaks well for certainly the effort that Brian, Russ, John, Roy, and Joe back there placed into this, and all the staff behind it. I think you truly deserve congratulations for this. And your hard work, as you pointed out, Roy, is going to be the key to making the performance that's critically necessary for the project something we can look forward to support the plan.
Thank you. Director Rossi.
Yeah, having spent 18 months of my life working with you on this, I can only think of the biblical stanza.
Could you speak up? I can't hear you at all back.
Sorry, but no, I can't speak up any higher than I'm talking about.
Or maybe closer to the microphone?
We'll try.
Thank you, I really appreciate it.
That is dancing at the beginning. And I would say that in that 18 months, you all have done a tremendous job. And I echo all of my colleagues' congratulations as well. It is a chance now to move this thing forward with real understandings of where we are and where we're going and why we're not getting where we're supposed to be getting, and which will happen. I mean, life is what it is. But that we can keep directionally going the way we're supposed to go. So I applaud you for that as well. But I do have two questions for you. One is that in the initial briefing, there were a number of reserves, which have now been moved into other line items. I assume that we can track those now.
That is correct. There's no reserve. Every fund or every budget is tied to an actual line item now.
Okay, perfect. The second thing is that as you look at this plan and you look at your 3 priorities, and you look at that one mitigation point about valley to valley, in effect, versus Central Valley, and the work that you may or may not have to do predicated on funding, is there a focus on things that people might think they need to have to do valley to valley that are expenditures of funds that would be better not to be expending until we have a better understanding about whether or not we're going to get the funding we need?
No. We are very, very clear. That's the whole point of having a baseline, that we focus on the activities that's in the plan, that's approved in the plan, identified in terms of money and timing, and stick to that plan. That is the whole point of having this plan. There is no activity that is being expended that is detracting from that prioritization.
Again, thank you very much. I'll be dancing at the end.
Can I say thank you, the direction from the board members actually does help getting it to this point, so.
Director Camacho.
So this is considering, and this baseline is taking into consideration all of valley to valley.
The baseline takes into account the whole program in terms of Central Valley, the V to V in terms of certain and the rods for the whole of the program.
And is there any contemplation of the rolling stock that we may need for testing.
Yes. There is,
So that is factored into this.
it is a part of the schedule, it is part of the money, it is part of the considerations and decisions we will need to take in the timeline that I've identified of the next 6 to 12 months regarding what we are delivering when. Yes.
No, then I have really no other questions, and I do compliment you, this whole team, for doing the job that you've done, because it really, really helps us understand this better. Thank you.
Unless you have questions, Mr. Chairman, I move the motion.
You can move the motion, and I'll take a second, and then I just have a comment that I want to make. Okay, it was moved by Director Rossi. I think I heard Director Camacho second it. Before we vote, my colleagues have been eloquent in their comments about this. I just want to make two other quick points about the significance of this baseline and what we're dealing with today. And it's amazing how time does move on, but really it was 6 months ago that we announced that the initial construction segment in the Central Valley was going to cost more than we had anticipated. Was going to take longer, and then that was followed by other assessments of higher costs and schedule impacts across the entire program. And so for the last 6 months, I think there's been abroad in the land sort of a sense that the program was facing a lot of headwinds because of these things and so forth. But actually, I look at it differently. As some of my colleagues have said, over the past several years, we've had pieces of things, but I've always had that disquieting feeling that we just didn't have our arms around the entirety of the program, that things were operating in cross purposes, that we didn't have a real sense of what was going on at the deep level. And there's a term that's often used in the political context of a reset. And I think over these last 6 months, what we've really done here is taken a step back, gone into detail about what's real, told the public what that is. And now, with this today, I think what we're showing is that we really have the tools to manage this program. And one of the things that I had been saying publicly in response to some of the earlier reports was, look, maybe we were a little slow moving from a planning organization to a project delivery organization. The key to a project delivery organization is you've got to have the underlying fundamentals, the stuff that's under the hood. It's kind of boring. The public doesn't really understand it or care to. They just want to know what the results are. But the only way you get results is you've got to have the management tools to be able to accomplish something like this. So from my perspective, and I think this is the view that you're hearing from all of us on the board, is a growing level of confidence that we have the management tools in place now to move forward. Yes, it's going to be hard. Yes, there are going to be bumps in the road, but I just have a much greater level of comfort that that there's control of the program and direction, that we're driving it and we're not just a passenger in our own airplane here. So I just want to end by saying that Roy, I think it was 1 year ago this month that you stood where you're standing now and we introduced you. Brian, you've been here 6 months, and in that 6 months, not only did you dig into a lot of these issues that needed to be brought to light, you led the staff in producing the 2018 business plan, which was an enormous accomplishment, and now followed that up with this baseline. One of the things that Brian said to me in sidebar is, a significant thing here is the much higher level of capital expenditure, meaning we're actually building stuff on the ground to a budget level, and that gives us something to really go on. So I just want to add my voice to those of my colleagues. I think we're getting a very high level of performance, and we have a very high level of confidence in our leadership team, starting with the CEO, Brian Kelly, with COO Joe Hedges. Roy Hill, you've been great this last year in getting your arms around all this, and Russ, you've been a stalwart, and of course we know that you're backed up by teams of people. So with that, I just wanted to I just wanted to say that this does feel like we're getting the basics in place so that we can now go out there and really kick a lot of dirt around and get stuff done. So that's good. With that, would the Secretary please call the roll? Let me just clarify on the motion, looking at Mr. Fallen's, so that the motion is to basically adopt the baseline and also to simultaneously adopt all of the contract modifications that are suggested by the staff in this presentation.
Accept the baseline and then approve these changes to the contract.
Okay, so your nomenclature is important. So the motion is to accept the baseline and to approve the proposed contract amendments. All right, with that, will the Secretary please call the roll?
Vice Chair Richards?
Yes.
Director Rossi?
Yes.
Director Curtin?
Yes.
Director Lowenthal? Director Camacho? Director Miller? Chair Richard?
Yes. Thank you all very much.
That we should thank Roy for, in answering Tom's question about what would make it better, that there would be no board.
That there would be no board? Yeah, that would be good. I'm still wondering what a schedule is, but I'm getting past that.
Just go England in the World Cup. That's
What was it Winston Churchill said, two peoples divided by a common language, I think was the...
It is pounds in there, not dollars.
Yes. Pounds, not dollars. Yeah, that's good. Okay, our last public item is item 5, to consider providing funding for an agreement with the BNSF Railway, it's also a railroad, to create work windows for the Central Valley construction. Mr. Hedges. You're allocated 20 minutes. I don't think you need it, do you?
Sir, it won't take 20 minutes.
Okay.
The ask is to modify, reconcile HRSA 1611, which you approved back in April of 2016. There is 2 puts to this ask and 1 take. The 2 puts, $11 million, is for the Callaway connection. The other ask is for $27 million with regards to the Una siding. And the takeaway is a result of a CP4 ATC for $16.5 million. So the total ask is for $21.5 above the previously approved $100 million, with the stipulation that BNNS agrees to increasing their outages to 3 per week. So again, as BNS does not increase their outages, then it will null and volley this vote, an additional 21.5. Now, also what's important as we go forward in this new approved baseline, the first question you should ask, is this money in the baseline? The answer is yes, Joe, it is in the baseline. It is accounted for the baseline. It should have been the 10th item on page 17 of the presentation that you received. However, though, because of its lateness of this action, we thought it was very important to be transparent, which is one of Brian's new edicts in our new PMP with regards to openness and transparency. So again, since it was belated, we thought we'd bring it to you and ask for your concurrence and approval to be able to do this. Now, the significance of doing these with regards to the 2 puts. If you look at it, affects the whole alignment. The Callaway connection is basically, it is south of Fresno. It allows us to connect the BNSF and UP together, as in to create a diversion, as in to get the traffic to allow outages with regards to CP1. Now, with regards to the request for Una siding, it is to allow us for BNSF to stage and to store trains during outages, predominantly in the southern half of the corridor. What's interesting about this is thinking ahead. This is what the baseline allows you to do. This is a requirement that would be required if we move down into the LGA, regardless, right? So By doing it right now, we're able to avoid and to mitigate some of those costs with regards to approximately up to about $70 million of additional costs to the authority. So it's good looking ahead. Now, we will try to recover some of this cost back from our contractors. We talked about this integrated approach and aligning some of our conflicts. There is contractual language that would allow us to collect some of this back. We're working with legal and developing a strategy to be able to do that. But again, what I'm looking for right now is to make sure, right, that we do not incur the possible delays that could stretch the completion of CP4 out into the mid-20s, 25s areas. Very, very, again, looking at the schedule, looking at implications, right? Trying to be proactive, okay? Ma'am?
Move.
Question, well, why don't we get the second first, and then we'll take a question. Do we have, okay, it's been moved by Director Miller, seconded by Vice Chair Richards. Question from Mr. Rossi.
When is this money going to be spent?
This money we will immediately go forth. This money will be spent by BNSF. This is not additional tasking to our existing contracts or to a new contractor. BNSF will execute this money. When will it be expensed? It will be expensed in the next 2 years.
So it'll be expended partially in this budget year and partially in next year's budget?
Yes, sir. I'm not aware of exactly dollar for dollar, but it's for immediate. It's to get these agreements in place. One of the things that has to happen is to ensure that we can do this and take benefit from this is, especially down south with regards to UNA, is getting this design, the procurement of the equipment underway so that we can then execute it.
So it's in the baseline. It is, we're going to approve this increase to a budget that's probably going to be expended in a future.
This year and next, sir.
How much?
I don't know. I do not know, sir. I have to get you those answers. We can give you that reply right back.
Because my concern is this. It's I'm trying to understand if you're increasing a contract or you're increasing the budget.
Yes. So to answer your dollar question, it's currently in the fiscal year 18-19 budget that I just presented, the 1.8, there's $30 million of this work, which is already budgeted in that. It's part of the 1.8. The additional ask of 21.5 will be spent in fiscal year 19-20 and 20 and 21. So this is an ask for a resolution to what was originally $100 million, is now to $121
So
million.
it's not a budget issue. It's a contract. You're increasing the contract. Because the
Yes, in
budget
future-
isn't changing. You're
yeah.
going to spend the
Correct.
same monies. So if the
That is
budget isn't changing, then what you're doing is increasing the contract. I'm just trying to understand.
that is actually correct.
The T accounts here. And so as you look at that, what we're doing is increasing the contract, which you've already built into the baseline.
That is correct.
Okay, I'm good.
Okay, other questions? Will the Secretary please call the roll?
With one caveat. This is something we've seen before. I want to be sure we don't see it here. Is now that it's approved, that it doesn't get, who has the authority to pull it forward?
Or to pull it forward in the current year?
Yeah. Because if you look at your cash flows.
It would go through our governance process, the PDC, the VOC.
Okay. And the CEO. Okay. So we know who to pillar.
Thank you, sir. May I have another? All right. Secretary, please call the roll.
Vice Chair Richards,
Yes.
Director Rossi,
Yes, if we're amending it to read contract.
Director Curtin, Director Lowenthal. Yes. Director Camacho,
Yes.
Director Miller. Yes. Chair Richard.
Yes. Thank you, staff, for that. With that, the board will now enter into closed session in the anteroom off to my right, and I will come back and report on any items out of the closed session. The board has completed its closed session. We have no items to report. With that, this meeting of the California High-Speed Rail Authority is adjourned.